All right, let's talk about a revolution. Not one with barricades and cannons, but a revolution in poetry. We're going to peel back the layers on a group of rebels who totally changed the game, a group we now call the Romantics. This isn't just the style, this was a full-on rebellion.
But before we get into the nitty-gritty, let me ask you something. What makes a poem really hit you? What gives it its power? Is it just a bunch of clever words, a perfect rhyme scheme, some big brainy idea? Just hang on to that thought for a moment because the Romantics had a very, very different answer.
And here it is. This one line from William Wordsworth is pretty much the key that unlocks the whole movement. The spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. The idea that real poetry wasn't something you carefully constructed in your head. No, it was something that burst out of your heart. It was all about raw, unfiltered, powerful emotion. And that, right there, was a total game changer.
Now you might be thinking, okay, a new trend, but this was so much more than that. The Romantics were directly rebelling against the entire literary establishment of the 18th century, an era that was all about logic and strict rules. Their goal? To basically tear up the entire rulebook.
And you can see the battle lines drawn so clearly right here. On one side you had the old guard, the neoclassicists. For them, poetry was about reason, intellect, following the rules, and focusing on society. And the Romantics, they just flipped that whole thing on its head. They championed raw emotion over cold reason, wild imagination over intellect, total creative freedom over stuffy rules, and, this is a big one, the inner world of the individual over the expectations of society. It was a massive shift from poetry of the head to poetry of the heart.
So how did they pull this off? How do you build a whole new kind of poetry from the ground up? Well, it wasn't just chaos. They weren't just writing down whatever they felt without a plan. They actually developed a sort of toolkit, a set of core ideas that really fueled all of their work.
And that toolkit was basically built on three massive pillars. First, a belief in what we'll call radical emotion. Second, a deep, almost religious reverence for sacred nature. And third, an unshakable faith in the absolute power of the supreme imagination.
So that first pillar, radical emotion, that's the spontaneous overflow we were just talking about. For these poets, your personal, subjective feelings, your joy, your sadness, your sense of wonder, that was the most authentic thing in the universe. Your feelings weren't just valid, they were the actual source of truth and great art.
Okay, next up, sacred nature. For the Romantics, a mountain or a forest wasn't just some pretty scenery for a painting. No way. It was a living, breathing thing. It was a teacher, a healer. It was a spiritual escape from a world that was getting more and more industrial and, in their eyes, corrupt. Nature was where you went to find yourself.
And that brings us to the final pillar, the supreme imagination. This was the poet's superpower. The poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge put it best when he called it the living power and prime agent of all human perception. It was the ability to see what others couldn't, to dive into dreams, mystery, even the supernatural, and to create whole new worlds that could show us truths that our normal, everyday reality just couldn't.
Okay, so we've got the toolkit. Radical emotion, sacred nature, supreme imagination. Let's see how it actually works in the wild. And we'll start with one of the founding fathers of the movement, William Wordsworth, who is the absolute perfect example of the poet of nature.
You see, Wordsworth's genius was that he took these huge cosmic ideas and found them in the most ordinary places. He believed the biggest truths weren't in some epic poem about kings and gods. Nope, they were right there, in a simple flower, in a quiet landscape, or in the words of a regular person you might meet on the road.
And you can feel this deep belief in one of his most famous lines from the poem Tintern Abbey. He's basically saying that nature is a constant, a loyal friend. It's a moral force that, if you truly love it, will never, ever let you down. It's not just pretty, it's good. This focus on the real world also changed the way he wrote. Look at this example from his poem We Are Seven. He's using incredibly simple, everyday words. He called it the real language of men. He wasn't trying to sound fancy or academic. He was trying to capture a real human moment to explore a massive idea. And in doing so, he made poetry for everyone.
But Wordsworth wasn't a solo act. His great partner in crime was Samuel Taylor Coleridge. They kicked off this whole movement together, but Coleridge, he took that same romantic toolkit and built something completely different. He was the poet of the inner world, the poet of the imagination.
So, Wordsworth looks out at a beautiful landscape and sees the source of all joy and truth.
But Coleridge, who struggled with depression and illness his whole life, started asking a really tough question. What if all that beauty isn't actually in the landscape? What if it's all just coming from inside your own head?
And his answer in his poem Dejection is, well, it's a bombshell. He says that the passion, the life, the feeling of the world, it doesn't come from outward forms like mountains or stars. As he says, the fountains of all that beauty are within us. If you feel empty inside, the most beautiful sunset in the world is just going to look gray. A totally profound shift from Wordsworth.
So if the source of everything is within, Coleridge's mission became about exploring that vast inner world. He dove into dreams, visions, nightmares, the supernatural. His goal was to take things that were totally fantastic and make them feel psychologically real to the reader.
And his masterpiece, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, is the perfect example. I mean, you've got a ghost ship, spirits of the dead, a curse. But all these supernatural things aren't just there for spooky fun. They are a way of showing us what's going on inside the sailor's head. That albatross around his neck becomes a crushing physical symbol of his own guilt. We are literally inside his personal hell.
And if you want the ultimate proof of his imaginative power, just listen to this famous line from Kubla Khan. The whole poem, famously, came to him in an opium-induced dream. It's pure creation, a world built not from looking at nature, but from plunging into the limitless, mysterious, and sometimes terrifying depths of the human mind.
So, what do we have? We have Wordsworth looking outward to nature for truth, and Coleridge looking inward to the imagination. Two different paths, but both part of the same revolution. A revolution that put the individual's inner life front and center. So, why does any of this matter to us, 200 years later?
Well, the Romantics fought to prove the value of human emotion in an age of machines and scientific logic. And that kind of leaves us with a question for our own time, doesn't it? In a world that's more and more driven by data, algorithms, and AI, what is the value of our own messy, human, spontaneous overflow of powerful feeling? Something to think about. Thanks for watching.